What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by your favorite beat reporter, Chris Fedor. Chris, how was your 4th of July weekend, my friend?
Man, it was jam-packed. It was busy, but it was awesome. Took Elliot to a thing called Bay Days, which is in our city. Basically a carnival. They've got games, they've got rides. He went on his first ever Ferris wheel, which was pretty incredible. And then he went on his first ever kiddie roller coaster. And I tried to sit with him, but I was too big. So I told him, I said, Elliot, Dad can't come on this. Are you okay doing it by yourself? You have to do it by yourself. Nobody else can sit with you. Dad can't fit. And he said, okay, bye. and then he rode his first roller coaster, which was absolutely awesome. And then we had pool day yesterday with the family. He was jumping off the side of the pool into Dada's arms, Mama's arms. So it was a really, really good family-filled weekend. How about you?
Man, I did not do a whole lot this weekend, but we did host a little bit of a kickback for some of my friends who don't have access to like the fireworks and stuff like that on the 4th of July in the downtown. I found out like a month or two ago, out of being here over 9 months or so at this point, that I have a rooftop. And I
Very
was
nice.
like, yeah, and I was like, oh, well, it has grills on it. So we can host and have grills upstairs and even watch the fireworks without having to pay anything or people had to pay for parking. So that'll work out. And then on Saturday, I just played in my normal softball league and did some fireworks on my own. So,
Okay. Very
but
nice. Nothing wrong with that. I wish we would have gotten some fireworks. Unfortunately, Elliot goes to bed at 8:30 every single night, so shooting off fireworks at 9:45, an hour and a half or so after his bedtime, he would have been the devil probably, with how angry and how much he just wanted to go to bed. So we didn't even push it. We didn't even try. We just decided that we were going to put him to sleep at the normal time, and when he's old enough for fireworks, then we'll work our way there.
no sparklers, no nothing. I get no fireworks.
Nothing, not yet.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And the Cavs have done, like we said last week, some fireworks of their own, but stuff has become official now, Chris. There's no more reporting being done as of now. Donovan Mitchell officially extended his contract with the Cleveland Cavaliers today. A big thing that we talked about last week when the report came out, and also Donovan kind of making the news himself on social media that he will be returning to the Cavs. So it was more of a when rather than if situation. But Donovan Mitchell going to be with the Cavs for a long, long time, and he actually also had created a pathway for him to accrue 10 years of service and then also be able to add an extension on top of that when he gets to those 10 years. It's definitely feeling out like a lot of the people that were saying that he was going to leave Cleveland are eating their words at the moment, because this could be the destination where he ends the rest of his career. What do you think about that, Chris?
Well, I think we have to hold off on that one, Ethan. Things change quickly in the NBA. The landscape changes quickly. I'll say this from the very, very beginning. Donovan has talked about how happy he is in Cleveland, how excited he was about this opportunity, how much he believed in the organization, the direction of the organization, how happy he was to play alongside Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen. And during his time in Cleveland, none of that changed. If anything, he just got more embedded in this city of Cleveland, into this organization. And when you talk about somebody who embraces everything that the franchise is and embraces everything that the city is, going to high school basketball games, doing other things on the side when it comes to his Adidas appearance at a Dick's Sporting Goods and sponsoring a high school basketball team. Like, that's a guy who is fully invested in the market where he is currently. And he did the same thing in Utah because he's that kind of guy. He wants to make it home. And he talks about Cleveland as home. He talked about being happy here in the city. He talked about everything that the city had to offer. But at the end of the day, Ethan, in 3 years when this thing is going to be decided again, when Donovan decides what's the next step, what's the right step for me in my career, it has to make enough basketball sense for him to stay in this situation. So it is on Kobe Altman. It is on Mike Gansey. It is on Dan Gilbert to put every single piece around Donovan to allow him to compete for championships, because that's ultimately what they've been selling him on. They've been selling him on the basketball situation here. Look, Kenny Atkinson, new head coach, can get more out of this offense than JB Bickerstaff could, can get more out of this core group than maybe JB Bickerstaff could. Darius Garland as your potential running mate, Evan Mobley into the future as a potential all-star, a potential all-NBA type player. That's what it's going to come down to for Donovan, is what is the best basketball situation for me to compete for championships. So that's on Kobe Altman to make the right moves so that Donovan has the proper supporting cast, so that Kenny Atkinson is the right coach to take this team to the next level, so that Darius Garland becomes the best running mate for Donovan, and it's not a wonky fit moving forward. So they have to make the right moves. They have to continue to be aggressive and active in free agency, in the trade market, and trying to do the things that will allow this organization to get on the same level as some of the top tier teams across the NBA. Because I think if we're being honest right now, Ethan, they're not on the top tier of teams around the NBA. They're probably like 8 to 12 in that kind of range around the league. They got to get higher than that to continue to appeal to Donovan. Otherwise, he's going to be looking for a situation that can maybe give him something that the Cavs can't. That's in the future. But I think like that idea is something that is going to loom over this franchise for the foreseeable future, and it should.
And I think it's interesting, Chris, because in the podcast that I did solo dolo the other day, I had a question from a subtexter asking where I thought that the Cavs were in the Eastern Conference. And I had them ranked fifth as of right now with the current roster that they have, going up against guys like the Boston Celtics, the 76ers, the Milwaukee Bucks, all of those different teams that we kind of see in the same tier as the Cleveland Cavaliers. Obviously, Boston is on its tier of its own at the top of the league. But as much as the Cavs are trying to do to make things happy for Donovan Mitchell, that also relies on the people that are around him, right? So the Cavs went out and made a move the other day, going to get Johnny Bryant as the associate head coach to Kenny Atkinson. For people who don't know, and I know me and Chris have talked about it already on this podcast, but Johnny Bryant is a major factor in Donovan Mitchell's career in the NBA. He credits him with a lot of his success and a lot of his growth since he got to the league. So I didn't find it very let's say unpractical for the Cavs to reportedly make that move to go get Johnny Bryant, and then the very next day Donovan Mitchell officially extends his contract. It felt like it went hand in hand, Chris. And obviously I want to go a little bit in depth on Johnny Bryant's background. The Cavs, so Johnny Bryant was most recently in New York with the Knicks. And it's just something that you see because you understand that Donovan Mitchell's dad is a part of the Knicks organization and all of those type of things. So it's almost like a family reunion coming back to Cavs Nation when it comes to Donovan Mitchell and Johnny Bryant. Chris, what did you think about that move?
Well, first off, I think Johnny Bryant's resume is one that stands on its own. He has done a lot of really, really good things throughout the course of his career in the NBA. He was on the Cavs' radar 5 years ago when they did their coaching search and they ended up with John Beilein. He was somebody that was on their radar. He was somebody that they got good feedback on. And clearly, while he was in Utah, growing, developing, maturing, getting ready to take the next step in his career, he obviously did the right things to become Tom Thibodeau's right-hand man in New York. Now, I think part of the reason why the Knicks went out and brought him in is because they thought he was going to help with Donovan Mitchell. New York had a plan for a number of years to go out and try and get Donovan Mitchell. either sign him in free agency or trade for him. And they had the opportunity to do it 2 summers ago. And the Cavs swooped in and they had a better offer, a more appealing offer for the Jazz, given what the Knicks were willing to give up and what the Knicks weren't willing to give up. So I think part of the reason why Johnny Bryant was brought to New York was that. But he also showed himself to be a competent, high level head coach. And a lot of people that I've talked to in the Knicks organization, around that organization, have talked about, some of the player development stuff that he has in his background that carried over to New York, and some of the players that worked alongside him continuing to get better, and the trust that Tom Thibodeau continued to give to him. And there were some people in New York that were wondering, was he going to be Tibbs' eventual replacement? He could still, right? That may be the next step for him. Who knows? But it was somebody that the Cavs wanted to interview based on the things that he has accomplished throughout his career. Now, in saying that, of course, the Donovan Mitchell factor plays a part in it. When it comes to Johnny Bryant, what he's known for most in his career, Ethan, is being the player development coach for Donovan Mitchell, being the guy that Donovan talks about as being so instrumental in the success of his career. I mean, Donovan sat down with me prior to the playoffs this year, Ethan, and beyond his family members, his close family members, he said that the most influential person in his life was Johnny Bryant. The things that they talk about outside of basketball, the things that they talk about when it comes to basketball, the things that they did together when Donovan was a youngster in Utah that allowed Donovan to become an all-star and an all-NBA type player, and now an MVP candidate here for the Cavs. So that is something that Johnny Bryant is known for, as Donovan's go-to player development guy. At the same time, obviously, the Cavs have put a point of emphasis on player development. That's a big part of the reason why they hired Kenny Atkinson. And Johnny Bryant has that in his background as well. And with some of the coaching changes that the Cavs made, one of the guys that oversaw the development of Donovan while he was here in Cleveland is no longer on the coaching staff for the Cavs. So they needed somebody else to take over that kind of thing. And maybe that is going to be Johnny Bryant. Maybe it's going to be Jordan Ott. But player development is a key ingredient to the Cavs taking the next step. Kobe Altman talked about it during multiple press conferences. Kenny Atkinson spoke about it. That's what he's known for. It's what Johnny Bryant is known for. So that matters in this conversation. In saying all of that, it is clear that Donovan Mitchell has a ton of influence inside this organization. And that's the way that it goes with star players that you believe in, star players that you want to have a partnership with. You know what I mean? They're going to be involved in coaching decisions. They're going to be involved in roster decisions. They're going to be involved in recruiting guys in free agency. They're going to be involved in putting together an off-season get-together that is player-driven, so that they can be more prepared for the season coming up, or so that they can be more prepared for training camp. But now in this organization, Max Strus is here in large part because of Donovan. George Niang is here in large part because of Donovan. I think Karis LeVert re-signed as quickly as he did in part because of his relationship with Donovan. Ty Jerome is here in part because of Donovan Mitchell. Kenny Atkinson is now here in part because of Donovan Mitchell. Johnny Bryant is now here in part because of Donovan Mitchell. And his personal trainer is employed by the Cavs as well.
And Jared Allen has been quickly kind of taken off the trade market because Donovan Mitchell wants to keep him around. Also, in part. Also, thinking about the other moves that the Cavs have made, but also looking at the past. Like, we think about guys for the coaching staff that they've brought in. And we've talked about it on multiple occasions, Chris. The 1-2 punch for the Cavs bench. The first guy doesn't lead up to expectations, and they slide number 2 right on in. Right? So, originally, when this coaching search was getting into the nitty-gritty, when it was getting to the end of it, it looked like it was going to be James Borrego and Kenny Atkinson. Kenny Atkinson ultimately won, so it kind of looked like James Borrego was going to be potentially in that number 2 spot. Instead, it's Johnny Bryant. So let's look at a little bit at memory lane just for 2 seconds, because we know that JB Bickerstaff replaced John Beeline and Ty Lue replaced David Blatt, right?
Yep.
So if anything happens with Atkinson that is not what the Cavs had envisioned, now Donovan Mitchell has the potential to be like, hey, my guy here knows what he's doing. My guy here is still looking for his first head coaching job. Slide him on into there. But it's an interesting thing. But Chris, I also want to talk about the other assistant coaches that we've heard about that have been joining the organization as of late as well. And one of them is Jordan Ott, who was an assistant coach under Kenny Atkinson for 2 years of Atkinson's 4-year tenure as the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets. Obviously, he was also there during the time of Jared Allen and Karis LeVert, so it's like a little reunion there as well. And even after Kenny Atkinson left the Brooklyn Nets, the Nets retained Jordan Ott for 2 more years under Steve Nash, when Ott had the opportunity to learn how to manage stars like James Harden, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving after Atkinson's departure, because we know that James Harden didn't get traded to Brooklyn until after that, and Kevin Durant was injured and didn't actually get to play under Kenny Atkinson in Brooklyn. And then Ott left for Los Angeles to be an assistant under Darvin Ham with the Lakers. And then another guy that the Cavs brought on is former NBA forward DeMarre Carroll, as he was an 11-year NBA player and has spent the last 2 seasons as an assistant coach, first in Milwaukee and then with the Los Angeles Lakers, where he coached alongside assistant Jordan Ott. So, Chris, it feels like everybody in this coaching staff is connected in one way or another, whether they have relationships to prior or they understand that they have the kind of same skill sets, player development being a main thing, like you mentioned. This feels like it is being built to be a community, a family, something that will be very, very hard to break up if anything like that needs to be happened. What are your thoughts on everything going on and how these different coaches have been brought back together from a couple years ago?
It's a relationship business. That's what it is. When you see these coaches take over these different jobs, they bring guys that they believe in, guys that they trust, guys that they know they can lean on for the grind of an 82-game season, for ideas that they're going to be open to accepting. Think about what JB Bickerstaff did immediately when he got to Detroit. Now that he's the head coach in Detroit and he's assembling his staff, reports are that he's bringing Sidney Lowe with him. That was one of the hirings that JB made shortly after he was the full-time head coach for the Cavs. So you bring in guys that you believe in, guys that you have seen work, guys that you trust. And it's clear that Kenny Atkinson has a trust level with Jordan Ott and DeMarre Carroll. I'm also told that it is likely that Dan Giroux, known around these parts as Big Dan, is going to stick around and he's going to be on this coaching staff too. Now, I think we might have to start calling him Teflon Dan, because no matter what happens, this dude is just going to stay. Like, he has gone through coaching changes, regime changes, rebuilds, a renaissance, you name it. He was on the staff of Ty Lue during the championship years. He was a guy who basically oversaw the development of Tristan Thompson early on in his career, and he has been by the side of Tristan every time that Tristan has been with the Cavs, basically. So whether it's Ty Lue, whether it's John Beeline, whether it's JB Bickerstaff, whether it's Larry Drew, who was the voice of the Cavs for a cup of coffee, basically, or now Kenny Atkinson, it feels like no matter what, Dan Giroux is going to have a spot, and that is likely going to be the case again. And again, that's part of player development. It's part of trust. It's part of what the organization believes in, what they want from this coaching staff. And I think one thing that Dan Gilbert has shown, and one thing that Kobe Altman has shown, is that they are going to put this coach in the best possible situation to be successful. They're going to give him the resources and the finances to put together the best possible staff, even if that means quote unquote overpaying for an assistant, even if that means rotating guys from back of the bench to front of the bench so that they can get the kind of experience that they want to get. Whatever the case may be, they understand that Kenny Atkinson on his own, like, that's not the hire. Obviously, that's the big hire this offseason, but it's put the right staff in place so that he can be successful, so that he can be comfortable, so that he has guys that he can lean on, that he can trust, that he can generate ideas from. And all indications are, from everybody that I've talked to around the league, Ethan, this is a very, very strong coaching staff.
And I mean, that's what they talked about it being, right, Chris? Like when Kenny Atkinson and Kobe Altman came to his introductory press conference, they said they were already in the weeds on the conversations, trying to figure out who was willing to come on board and who they were trying to keep around, because they already knew that the Cavs assistant coaching staff was strong when J.D. Bickerstaff was here, but they wanted to build on it. And obviously, Kenny Atkinson wanted to build with the relationships that he had made around the league. And now you look at the connections that these guys have with the players that are on the Cavs now and all of those things. It just feels like a real good camaraderie going on. And we know how much the Cavs thrived this past season of playing with joy and playing loose. And it just feels like they're going to have that vibe entering this next season rather than having to learn how to get to that standard during the middle of a season. But Chris,
I think the DeMar Carroll thing's interesting too, Ethan, and I think it's important. Obviously, he was around Giannis. He was with the Bucks. Then he was in Los Angeles. He was a player for Kenny Atkinson in 2 different stops. Now, Kenny wasn't the head coach in Atlanta when DeMar Carroll was there during the middle of his career, but Atkinson was on the staff. He was the right-hand man of Mike Budenholzer. So Atkinson, got to see what kind of person DeMar Carroll was, what kind of worker he was, what kind of player he was. And DeMar Carroll got to understand the things that mean most to Kenny Atkinson, the things that he values, and he can be an extension of that. So for him to be a former player and be able to connect to players the way that he can and the way that he has in the past, and him having a full understanding of as a player, what is it like playing for Kenny Atkinson? What are the kinds of things that he demands? He's going to be able to be a really, really good resource for a lot of the Cavs players that are getting their first real experience of Kenny Atkinson as a head coach.
I also think it's interesting because you understand, like you said, the player and coach connection is huge, but the coach to coach connection is big there too. Because being a former player, you're like, I know I might not have said anything as a player at the time if that would have happened for my coach, but this is what I was thinking. And so let's maybe take it a different direction the next time we try and approach the situation. So I
Right.
think having him on staff will definitely bring 2 different opportunities and viewpoints. And I think he could also form to be a mediator if necessary between coach and player. But I feel like Kenny Atkinson is a guy that wants to create one-on-one relationships. So I don't think he's going to get to that point. But Chris, as much of the moves that the Cavs have seemingly made on the coaching front, there's been a lack of moves in the free agency market. And Chris, there are fans that are begging for the Cavs to make a singular move at all this offseason. And we know, and we've talked about it, that the Cavs are very comfortable with the roster that they have. And it's more potentially looking at the trades that could be made to improve this roster around the margins. But those conversations get more difficult when we talk about the relationships that have already been made between the people that are on this team. So, Chris, the reality and the realistic possibility of the Cavs making off-season moves and the lack of them already, that doesn't seem too weird to me. How about you?
No, I mean, I wrote about it the day of free agency, Ethan, that this year's free agency was going to be more about their own, the decisions that they had to make internally. Donovan Mitchell, his extension, Evan Mobley, he's up for a rookie scale max, 5 years, about $215 million if the Cavs want to go that direction. Jared Allen is extension eligible. They have a decision to make there. If something makes sense for Jarrett and for the Cavs, and it can be a team-friendly type deal. I think the Cavs would certainly go down that road. And then the other big decision this offseason is what to do with Isaac Okoro. They tendered him a restricted free agent. They extended a qualifying offer to make sure of that. So that gives them a right to match any kind of offer sheet that he may receive from another team. And if that team does do their bidding for them on the open market and they make an offer to Isaac, then it's up to the Cavs to determine, okay, do we want to match that? Are we comfortable with that particular number? Do we want to explore signing trades? So a lot of this stuff had to do with their own internal decisions. The other layer to this whole thing is, well, there are two other layers to this. One of them is, Ethan, this is a terrible free agent class. It was from the very, very beginning. There weren't a lot of appealing options to the Cavs from the very beginning. And this is an offseason where a lot of teams are trying to be cognizant of the new rules. And I know that fans don't want to hear it. And I know that fans don't care about billionaires and what they would be spending and whatnot. But there are rules in place that are now more strict and more of a hindrance to a team if they start going into the first apron, into the second apron. There is essentially a salary cap that is now being put in place, and a hard cap that could happen for a team if they go a little bit too deep into the salary, if they start paying a little bit too much when it comes to their salary cap situation. So this is the first off season for those rules to be put in place, and teams are more cognizant of that. The Los Angeles Clippers mentioned the CBA multiple times in a press release to try and explain the whole Paul George situation that they were in, because they're aware of it, because they're thinking about it. You know, teams like Boston, they're thinking about it. Teams like the Lakers, they're thinking about it. All of these teams now have to start thinking about it because they could lose draft picks, because they could be hard capped, because a lot of these things that have been put in place by the NBA makes it problematic when it comes to team building if you start going down that particular road and you start being like a high salaried team. So into the future, the Cavs understand that Darius Garland has a big contract. Donovan Mitchell has a big contract. Evan Mobley could have a big contract. So you have to try and find the right balance when it comes to team building. And when it comes to Isaac Okoro, it is a hard path for the Cavs to bring back Isaac and use their mid-level exception, because they get very, very close to the apron, Ethan. And they don't want to get there. Not yet. Not before this team gets super expensive. Like when this team gets super expensive into the future, okay, then you just accept it. You're going to get to the apron. Okay, you're going to get into the luxury tax. Okay, the repeater tax clock is going to be ticking. You know what I mean? Like all of those things. Dan Gilbert has shown a willingness to spend, and he's going to spend when he feels like it's worth it and when he feels like the penalties aren't too restrictive. And I think for this free agent class, given the guys that are out there, I don't think the Cavs feel like it's worth it to go into some of those ranges that would make them a little bit queasy and make it more difficult when it comes to team building type stuff. Now, could they have theoretically worked out a potential sign and trade for Miles Bridges if Charlotte was willing to play ball? Yeah, they could have. Theoretically, they could have found some different salaries to aggregate and stuff like that, but then they would have been trading away players that they value and players that they want to keep on this roster. So that even would have been pretty tough for them to do. So it's not like they can't do anything. It's just, is there enough value to the player that we would be bringing here to start to worry about some of the salary cap implications of that particular move, whether it's right or wrong. And maybe they're wrong in their thinking. Maybe January is going to come and we're going to say, oh my God, the Cavs just sat on their hands in free agency and they needed another player to enhance the bench. Or, oh my God, are you kidding me? They were relying on George Niang. Couldn't they have found an upgrade over George Niang? Or, oh my God, couldn't they have found another two-way wing somewhere in the free agent marketplace? Look what X player is doing. Look what Y player is doing. Look what Z player is doing. And he was available in free agency. Maybe that's the conversation that we have in January. But right now, the salary cap situation that they're in is pretty tight. And when it comes to Isaac Okoro and the mid-level exception, it's hard for them to have both.
I think you mentioned two of the teams that are being highlighted right now as well, Chris, the Boston Celtics and the Los Angeles Lakers, when it comes to all of the money talks and things of that nature. Like the Boston Celtics just extended Jaylen Brown, or Jason Tatum, they just extended Derek White, and now the ownership group is talking about selling the team. Like that is the reality of how much some of these players are making. Some of the guys that go ahead.
Steve Ballmer, Ethan, is one of the richest dudes on the planet, and he just throws money around like it's monopoly money, right? He can't afford Paul George in this market. In this climate, he found it hard to have Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, and some of these other guys on the team to build the team the way that he wanted it to be as competitive as it can be in this current climate. That's Steve Ballmer, right? He's cognizant of the salary cap situation. His organization that he is in charge of is cognizant of the salary cap situation and is trying to be as judicious as possible when it comes to spending this offseason. Think about that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. And the Lakers get added to that conversation because LeBron James took a quote unquote pay cut to keep them underneath the second apron. Like all of these major market teams are being cognizant, and maybe it's harder for the Cavs because it seems like they're a smaller market team. They need to do all these big moves to keep up with these bigger market teams. But if you think about the bigger market teams are being financially frugal when it comes to the salary cap situation, then this little team called the Cleveland Cavaliers also has to look at it as well, even though we know that Dan Gilbert, as Chris mentioned earlier in this podcast, will spend when the time is necessary.
Right. Like, do you want the Cavs to be in a situation where they're hard capped and team building becomes really, really difficult, more difficult for them because of that? Also that they can sign Gary Trent Jr., also that they can go out and sign Jetty Osman, also that they can go sign Sadiq Bey. Like there's a give and take when it comes to this. And you can sit here and you can say, well, X player would be part of their rotation, right? Or Sadiq Bey would help when it comes to their 3-point shooting or their spacing. And I like him, and he's still young enough to continue to get better. And you can sit there and you can say, well, Gary Trent Jr. would help, and he's a better option. He's a more reliable option than some of the other guys that the Cavs would potentially use in their every night rotation. He's a more reliable option when it comes to scoring off the bench. You know what I mean? Like all those things are accurate, right? But it's like, how much better do those guys make the Cavs? And is it worth it for the penalties that come with that particular signing? Because there are going to be penalties that come with that.
And also I feel like it's also the fans that are like, have the same perspective. They're like, well, we need free agent signings. We need these trades. We need these signing trades, whatever. But they're also like, oh, well, where's Luke Travers? Is Amani Bates coming up yet? And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, if they make these sign trades and they make these free agent signings, where are the opportunities that these guys that you want to come up and get? Like, if you think Amani Bates is going to come up and challenge guys like Gary Trent Jr., who they just spent money on, or potentially whatever, like, that's not the reality of it. And that brings me to our next topic, Chris, and it's talking about the Summer League. And I know I have been bad when it comes to maybe quote-unquote bashing Amani Bates, but I don't think I'm bashing. I think I'm being real about his potential being really, really high when it comes to his offensive ability. but also
Mhm.
understanding how much room he has to grow and also mature to get to the level where we consistently see him in the Cavs rotation. And he took a big step and is taking a bigger step this offseason. Apparently, according to the Summer League roster, he has gained over 20 pounds for this
Mhm.
past off season, and I'm assuming it's in muscle because he keeps posting pictures of him in the gym, and even commented on Twitter that formerly Twitter, now known as X, that he's even higher than what his roster weight was. He's at 196. He's listed at 190. I mean, he's at 26 more pounds than he was entering last season. Like that's a good thing. And this summer league, Chris, we know that it's being ran by Jordan Ott, who the Cavs brought in recently to be an assistant coach on Kenny Atkinson. Luke Travers will be in attendance. Khalifa Diop will not be in attendance because he's still dealing with an injury. Craig Porter Jr. is on the roster. He's a guy who we expect to be running the point for them. But what do you expect from this summer league, and how important do you think it is when it comes to seeing the development of some of these guys coming into this next season, who are especially looking to see if they can make a rotational spot on this team?
Yeah, I don't put a whole bunch of stock into summer league, honestly. I've seen it in the past. Guys can blow up, guys can shine in summer league, and it just doesn't carry over. Because it's very, very difficult to sit there and say, well, he's doing this on this stage against this group of players in this kind of environment, and that means that all of a sudden it's going to translate to the NBA. Or sit there and say, like, this guy's struggling, this guy is not playing well, he's not creating separation, he's not handling whatever the defense throws at him. So that means he's going to go on to the NBA and he's going to be a bust. It just doesn't work that way. These things are very, very difficult to evaluate. They've always been very difficult to evaluate. I remember Marco Bellinelli, maybe, like, lit it up early in his career at Summer League, and Jimmer Fredette lit it up at Summer League and stuff. It just doesn't matter. So I think you have to keep it all in perspective and understand that it's just a showcase. It's for some of these guys, it's going to be their first taste of NBA basketball, NBA rules, NBA 3-point line, things along those lines. But I've never been somebody, Ethan, that puts a whole bunch of stock into summer league, and I'm not going to do that. Like, what Jalen Tyson does in Las Vegas is not going to inform my thinking one way or the other whether I think he can be at the back end of this rotation for the Cavs. You know what I mean? And if DJ Burns goes out there and he has the kind of performance that we saw from him during March Madness, where he was just dominant and he was an exciting player and he got himself basically on the radar, I'm not going to sit here and say, well, the Cavs got to sign him to a full contract, an NBA standard contract. You know what I mean? Because it just, in the grand scheme of things, it just doesn't matter all that much.
And I mean, it's interesting, Chris, because you're gonna get to go to summer league and
Mm-hmm.
experience it. First of all, how many summer leagues have you gone to, big fella?
Oh my goodness, it's been a lot of them at this point. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think this would be my fifth summer league. I want to say I was there with Evan Mobley. I was there with Darius Garland. Yeah, I think it's my fifth one coming up. My God, it's a lot of time to be spending in Vegas. By the way, it's also going to be obnoxiously hot next week in Vegas. Like, there is an excessive heat warning in Vegas. I saw a video earlier today, Ethan, of a palm tree at one of the Vegas resorts right by the pool that just caught on fire from the heat, from the sun, not from somebody being stupid, not from somebody like shooting a firework into it or something like that, just because it was baking in the sun and it's 117 degrees in the desert. I mean, that is obnoxiously hot. So I don't think I'm going to pack any pants. Um, and I probably am not going to spend a whole lot of time outside So I'll probably be in the gym for Summer League, back at my hotel, and at some restaurants and bars. And that's probably about it. And every time I'm in Vegas and I'm walking to the arena, if I do walk to the arena, probably not this time because I'll probably die, um, or just pass out from heat stroke or something. Every time, like I walk to the arena or I walk back from the arena in the past, I sing the song of "I've been through the desert on a horse with no name." So that's always been my tradition, and it's one of the things that I remember most about Summer League. But yeah, this will be number 5 for me. It'll be interesting to be there. In fact, like the more important things from my standpoint is being around the new coaching staff, and we know that this is a very connected, close group. So Cavs players are going to be there in Vegas, and that matters more to me than what DJ Burns does or what Amani Bates does or what Jalen Tyson does.
Speaking of the Heat in Las Vegas, dog, I mean, I remember being there for NABJ a couple years ago, and they were like,
Mm-hmm.
dry heat, you'll be fine. My
No,
behind, dry
no, man.
heat.
Like 100 is 100. Like 115 is just outlandish. Ain't no dry about that one. I mean, you can sit there and you can try and justify it all you want to. There is an excessive heat warning for a reason. They're setting records right now in Las Vegas for the temperature, so that's what I'm going to be walking into. That'll be fun.
The other thing that I think we should touch on, I know this is a Cavs podcast, but I want to make this become more fun, Chris. We're having fun. Let's continue this, right? The
Okay.
Olympics are coming up, and the American team, the Team USA, has basically
Mm.
put together the Avengers. The Avengers have assembled. Like, this team is ridiculous. And we're
Yeah.
starting to get videos of day 1 and day 2 of camp and all of these things going on, them going up against the national team, these younger guys. Everybody's looking at Cooper Flagg, who's a incoming freshman at Duke University, and how he's guarding Anthony Davis, going up against Anthony Davis. And we're like, this kid is 17 years old.
Yeah.
and is projected to be the number 1 overall pick in the 2025 NBA draft. But the team, you think about
Yeah.
the legends, the Hall of Famers that are on this Team USA team, and it's been 12 years since LeBron James has put on a Team USA jersey. This is Stephen Curry's first time ever. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is insane to think about, Chris, and the amount of dynamics in the relationships. I was more keen on looking at how people were interacting outside of the gym rather than on the court and what they were getting into. Obviously, Anthony Davis talked about playing alongside Stephen Curry and being like, I got so many open looks. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, dog. Obviously, you're playing with one of the best shooters the game has ever seen. But
Yeah.
it's just looking at this team and then looking at the teams that have gotten in, like Greece and Giannis is in, Puerto Rico is in. Like, this is a great time to be alive, and definitely interesting to see where this Team USA team is going to fare in the Olympics.
There's so many guys that you would put in your top 20 overall of NBA players that are part of Team USA. And obviously they have to come together and the fit has to be right and these guys all have to play well and to their potential. But when you're talking about just the roster that they built and the guys that were willing to play for Team USA and want to be part of USA basketball and play in the Olympics, who's the worst player on the team? Maybe Tyrese Halliburton? Maybe Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday is a 2-time NBA champion. He's one of the best individual on-ball defenders in the NBA. And at various points throughout the season, Ethan, Tyrese Halliburton was looked at as an MVP candidate because of everything that he was doing for the Indiana Pacers. So when those guys are considered the quote-unquote worst players on the roster, like that tells you how stacked this team is. It's just unbelievable to think about the level of talent and the guys that are going to be sharing the court together at one time. They could theoretically, Ethan, have a 5-man lineup of LeBron, Steph, KD, Embiid, and if you want to say Tatum, if you want to say Kawhi, if you want to say Ant, that's unbelievable to think about the potential of that team. So I'm really, really excited for the Olympics.
Yeah, and I mean they're in Vegas now, and man, I have to say, Anthony Edwards is becoming one of my go-to guys just to watch his interviews and his press conferences because I'm not gonna say he doesn't have media training, but like the man just says whatever's on his mind, whatever
Yeah,
he's
he does.
feeling, anything. And the latest thing that he said, he was like, "I'm still the number one option on this team. They still have to like play their game around me." And I was like, you realize you're on a team with Stephen Curry and LeBron James, right? And this is him like at full confidence, but still being himself, not giggling, not laughing, straight face, cold. Like I was like, and you are playing with these Michael Jordan comparisons really, really closely, my guy. Because if you do some crazy stuff with all of these superstars on your team,
Yeah.
man.
It reminds me a lot of Kyrie when he was part of USA Basketball and he would challenge Kobe Bryant and he was basically like, don't diminish my accomplishments. Are you kidding me? Like, I can play with you. I'm going to show you that I can play with you. I'm going to challenge you one-on-one. That level of swag, that level of confidence, that's kind of what you have to play alongside those guys, to be on a team with those guys and thrive in that kind of environment that the USA basketball players are going to be in. Nobody's going to hand them anything. They're not just going to run over the competition. We've seen in the past that cohesiveness, chemistry, system, so many of these teams that they're going to be playing against, those guys, those teams, those systems have all been in place. It's not something thrown together for one little mini camp and then, hey, let's go to the Olympics. It's very different for some of the international teams that they're going to be playing against. But I mean, when you're in this kind of competition, you have to have the mentality that Ant does. And I would expect Devin Booker has the same one, right? He might not be as boisterous about it, but that's how you become one of the greats. You have to have like almost an audacity that doesn't make sense to outsiders. And that's what Ant has. And he is 100% him. He is unapologetically himself, and he is not going to change no matter the environment that he's in.
And I know we talked about during draft week of how weak this draft was how weak the free agent market was, but I'm scrolling through the USA men's basketball X Twitter page, whatever you want to call it, and the U.S. men's national team U17 team just won their 7th straight gold medal, and they're 50-0, 50-0 at the U17 level, like 17 and under for people that don't understand that language. But that is crazy. And it feels like basketball. I know people say this all the time, but it feels like even though this was a weak class, the basketball world is in good hands. The up and comers know what they're doing and are going to be able to make an impact when they get to college and then to the league or straight to the league, depending on how the rules change over the next couple of years. But Chris, I want to end the podcast with anything you have else that you want to touch on. I think those are two of the things that I found most interesting going on around the world, especially with the Olympics coming up. But is there anything else that you want to touch on before we get out of here?
No, I don't think so, Ethan. I would just say for Cavs fans, be on the lookout for potential trade activity for this team. They've had a lot of conversations centered around some combination of Isaac Okoro, George Niang, Karis LeVert. I think it's not a situation where they're saying those guys can't come back on this roster. If those guys come back on the roster, we'll be in trouble. But they're definitely exploring the trade marketplace and seeing what's out there, seeing if they can upgrade the wing spot, seeing if they can find somebody that can give them a little bit more consistency at the 3-4 spot. It doesn't have to be a starter. right? This is a team that made big splash in free agency last offseason. This is a team that this offseason is focused more on their own guys. But Dean Wade, Isaac Okoro, Karis LeVert, George Niang, like I said, can the Cavs find a way to upgrade those particular spots? And if they can, and they don't have to give up too much, and they don't have to break up the core four in order to do it, I definitely think they will explore that. They're involved in conversations with Cam Johnson of the Brooklyn Nets. They're involved in conversations with the Brooklyn Nets on Dorian Finney-Smith. We've talked about DeAndre Hunter of the Atlanta Hawks as somebody who is currently available on the trade marketplace. Kyle Kuzma is available, although the price tag apparently is like at least 2 first-round picks. Cavs don't really have that. But they do have, future second-round picks that they can attach. So because of what they're probably willing to give up, Ethan, and because the limited draft capital that they have into the future, and because of the quote-unquote trade assets that they have not being as enticing to another team, I wouldn't set the expectations too high. Again, I think it's the realistic targets that you kind of have to convince yourself of yes or no. Do we want to do this? Does the value make enough sense? Is it an upgrade? Is it not an upgrade? You know what I mean? Like the no-brainer type moves where you say, okay, this guy would come in and he would thoroughly enhance the roster. This guy would be a splashy headline. I don't think they have the pieces to do that type of deal. The Paul George of the world, the DeJounte Murray of the world. Who else got traded? That was kind of a big deal. That's probably about it. Brandon Ingram, the rumors that are out there surrounding Brandon Ingram. I don't think the Cavs would give up what they would have to in order to get him. And I don't think that if there were a bunch of teams that were involved in those types of deals, I don't think that the Cavs would come out on top of them. But the second level type players, I do think are on the Cavs' radar. And I do think they have intriguing enough assets, including Isaac Okoro in a sign and trade, that could make it interesting for some team out there.
Sure, Chris, we've talked about this at length, but this, for Cavs fans, is why you stay to the end of the podcast. Chris might have listed off some names that you haven't heard of saying in a while or a couple podcasts, but that's what we give you, the insight, the fun, while also giving you possibilities that could happen during this offseason, even though it seems like it could be a stretch. But obviously, we know there's a long time until the next season, and the Cavs have some opportunity to make moves still if they deem fit. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial, or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.